Story 1. I live in England, but I am originally from Poland, and I am fluent in both Polish and English. A couple of days ago, I was ordering at a Subway when two Polish employees started talking. They said something like, "This fat ass wants chicken and bacon," and laughed. When it came to adding vegetables, I gave my order entirely in Polish with a big smile. The order cost me £4.80, but the looks on their faces were priceless. Story 2. I was traveling alone in Morocco. I was 22 years old and spoke enough Arabic to understand conversations, basic words, and phrases. I was trying on clothes at a small shop when two women helped me choose what to try on. They began talking about me in Arabic, saying I would be a great wife for one of the women's sons. As I was leaving, I replied in Arabic, "No thank you, but I appreciate your help." They were stunned. Story 3. I was a high school student in Toronto, and I speak Slovak, which is similar to Czech in Polish. One morning on the subway, two good-looking women started speaking Polish right next to me. I usually like to strike up conversations with fellow Central and Eastern Europeans. Unfortunately, they began discussing one woman's burning urination problem. With nowhere to move on the packed subway and no headphones, it was awkward for a 15-year-old to hear from two women. It got worse when they started talking about women's health issues. Now I have no issues with that conversation, but 15-year-old me was mortified. Felt like a long 45 minutes. Story 4. I am a Black American. My father served in the military and was stationed in Korea from his late teens to his mid-20s. He learned the language and taught it to me as a child. It became our secret way to speak around my mother, who hated it. I went to college at a school with a large Asian population. While my friends and I were in a study room, a group of students came and asked us to leave so they could use the room in English. There was no time limit, no sign-up, nothing that gave them that right, so I explained that we were here first and asked why they wanted that particular room. Then they started speaking Korean and said something like, "Ugh, of course the black bitch is being difficult. They've been here for a while. They need to leave. Maybe we can lie and say the professor reserved it." I responded in Korean, "Call me a bitch in English so I can punch you and so everyone in this room will know why." Their faces turned bright red. They could not say anything. They looked at me in shock and left the room. Story 5. When I was an exchange student in China, I was riding the subway in Shanghai. A mother and her daughter sat beside me at one of the stops. The daughter was about 4 or 5 and kept staring at me. Without turning her head, she asked her mother why the man was so strange and why his hair looked different. I pretended not to understand Chinese, and the mother patiently told her daughter that he was not strange. He was just a foreigner and they looked different. I thought it was very sweet, so I started talking to both of them in Chinese. They were very nice, and I hope they are doing well now. Story 6. I was in line to renew my license at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Two Latina girls were behind me, speaking in Spanish about my blue eyes. They blushed when I turned around and said thank you. Story 7. This is not my story, but my father's. We are from South Africa. My father speaks 5 languages: English, Afrikaans, which is similar to Dutch, French, Italian, and German. He emigrated to the United Kingdom in early 1995 when a lot of other South Africans were doing the same because of the embedded racism of a fledgling nation. He was on the London Underground when he overheard 2 men speaking about a pretty woman on the train in Afrikaans, his native tongue. According to him, they were being incredibly rude and using quite graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to her. He decided to speak up. He told them to fuck off and not to speak to people that way because they did not know who was listening. The 2 men looked horrified and fell silent immediately. At her stop, the woman turned to him and said in fluent Afrikaans that she bet they could not do half of those things with their tiny penises. My father just laughed in shock and watched her get off the train. It was pretty hilarious. Story 8. I moved to Thailand and took extensive language training. I was drinking coffee in a quiet shop when the barista and the waitress started guessing my age, where I was from, and why I had come 3 days in a row. I lived nearby. I thought it was flattering that they found me cute, but the barista added that I was a little fat. Before I left, I told her my age and hometown. When she returned my change, I said, "Yes, I am a little fat." Story 9. My great-aunt told a story about going into a butcher shop. When she walked in, the butcher was talking with a customer in Russian, which she also spoke. The butcher saw her, told the customer in Russian that he would take care of this old hag, and continued the conversation. So my great-aunt asked for a large amount of cold cuts, all sliced and wrapped. When it was ready, she told him in Russian to shove it up his ass and walked out. God, I loved that woman. Story 10. I was on the subway in New York City a few months ago when a family sitting across from me was playing I Spy in Hebrew with their kids. The parents went around describing each person they saw on the train, so when they got to me, I decided to play along. I looked up from my book, made a funny face, and covered my face with the book before the kids could find me. The parents started laughing and said to their kids, I spy someone who understands us. The parents and I shared a good laugh while their kids became really excited that someone else spoke Hebrew. They never figured out who it was, but it made my commute a lot more fun. Story 11. My late best friend, who was very tall and blonde, was in Tim Hortons. He spoke fairly fluent Arabic, having spent 7 years working in Saudi Arabia. 3 Arab men were sitting at a table, making very lewd comments about the women in the shop. He turned to them and said in Arabic, You need to shut up before someone kicks your ass. You never know who is listening. They were very confused and left soon after. Story 12. My significant other is a tattoo artist who speaks Bulgarian, Turkish, English, and German. One day we were queuing in the supermarket and 2 men behind us were laughing and snickering. She turned around and said something to them. She was laughing afterwards while one of the men went bright red. I asked her what that was about. The men had said, Look at her arm, those tattoos. Disgusting. How can you tattoo a naked woman on yourself? In Turkish, my significant other turned around and said, Thanks, bro. At first the man asked her to repeat because he did not even register that she could be speaking Turkish and assumed he had misheard English. That is when she said, For the tattoo opinion. It was funny from there. The man apologized and said he had never felt so much shame in his life. His friend suggested at least buying us some beers. This was in a small town outside Dublin, so I can understand why they did not think there would be any Turkish speakers around. Story 13. I have said this before. It happened a while ago. I went to a psychiatric emergency ward once and asked for help, and whether the staff were comfortable speaking English. I understand Danish but have a hard time making myself understood in it, and I did not want to feel like an idiot at a crucial time in my life. I stayed there for 4 days without anyone realizing that I knew what they were saying about me right in front of me. 2 of the nurses thought I was cute. 1 doctor thought I was lying all the time. Patient thought I was a spy for the staff. A lot happened during those 4 days. It made my stay way more enjoyable than it should have been. Story 14. My husband is the bilingual one. Not me. He is from Colombia, so he speaks Spanish fluently. But he grew up in the United States and has lived here most of his life. He also has a very fair complexion. Most people think he is just Caucasian. We were in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, looking for a place to eat. We went to a restaurant and he asked in English how much it would cost for all-you-can-eat tacos. The man at the door said it was $15. His friend beside him said in Spanish, I thought it was $12? And the first man replied, Yeah, but they do not know that. My husband understood everything. He told them in Spanish that they were lying ripoffs and that we would be going somewhere else. The man's expression was priceless. Story 15. I am an extremely white American man. I was stationed in Korea, and a buddy and I went into a store that was slightly off the beaten path. My buddy was in a different section and found something he liked. He asked the shopkeeper how much it was, and the shopkeeper said in Korean that because he was American it was $65. I looked over and saw a sign on the wall that said the exact item he wanted was $40. I approached the shopkeeper and asked him how much it cost, and he replied $40. I asked why he was charging him $65. He became embarrassed and apologetic, offered to sell the item for $35, and gave us each a soft drink. Story 16. I lived in Riga for a short while and went out almost every Friday to meet girls. Riga has many visitors from the United Kingdom, and I have spent a chunk of my time in the United States, so I generally speak English in the city center because I feel more comfortable using it. However, I also speak Russian perfectly well. One night, I was drinking a beer in a bar when a cute Russian girl came up to me and started speaking English. She invited me for a beer with her and her friend. I did not have anything else planned that night, so I agreed. What followed was an hour of them trying to make me buy a bottle of Dom Perignon and a lot of dirty talk about what one of them would do to me if I agreed. They also told the bartender, who knows me fairly well, that they were going to rip me off and that I was a foreign idiot. I ended up buying them 4 beers out of politeness. It was fun for a while. Eventually, I got really tired of it all and my friend contacted me, so I switched to Russian, thanked them for a nice evening, and left. Their faces were red with embarrassment and anger. Oh well, do not scam people. Story 17. My neighbors went on holiday with their sister's family in Spain. The sister can speak fluent Spanish. They are Irish. Apparently, a tour guide in Spain began referring to them as those English sluts. They were not ones to let anything slide, so an argument broke out very quickly. Edit. I woke up this morning to 2 direct messages asking me to call a number to join the Illuminati. I guess this is what fame is like. Story 18. My dad from Tennessee speaks Chinese and travels to China often for work and other reasons. Once, while driving, he hit a bird that became stuck in the front of his truck. A Chinese man saw the bird and said to his friend in Chinese, "He drove too fast." My dad replied, "No, he flew too slowly." Story 19. I live in Austria, but my father is from Brazil. All my Austrian aunts and uncles married Brazilians. My grandparents on my mother's side opened and led a factory for our family company in Brazil, which is why everyone was there. Some eventually came back to Austria just like my mother and father. My siblings and I were raised multilingual but lived most of our lives in Austria. Once, when I was around 10, my mother and I were on a tram in Vienna with my little brother, who was about 2, in a stroller. He started crying loudly. A Brazilian woman then spoke in an obnoxious tone. "Well, these European folks do not know how to treat their children with love. How can someone be so cold and unaffectionate as to let a child scream without taking them out of the stroller and holding them?" We were standing. There was no seat large enough to take the stroller, so I became worried and wanted to comfort my brother and take him out. My mother stopped me and loudly said in Portuguese, "Leave him. It is too dangerous to take him out of the stroller while we are standing and the tram is moving." You could see the woman's face go from red to white and back to red. She got up and left at the next stop so fast that we started laughing, and my brother eventually calmed down. Not very exciting, but I find it funny when I think back. Story 20. This happened to my wife when she worked at McDonald's. She looks somewhat Asian but is from Guatemala. A group of Spanish-speaking people paid at the drive-thru and tried to shortchange her. The driver said "Esa maldita China no sabe contar," meaning that damn Asian lady cannot count. My wife took the money and very politely told them in Spanish that they were short. The driver turned red while the passengers could not stop laughing. Story 21. This was during the Christmas season. I was walking with my friend to a local bar. A few Russians were standing outside their home smoking, and 1 or 2 had drinks in their hands. As we walked past, a gentleman said in Russian, "What are you looking at, handsome guys?" He meant it as a challenge, but I turned around and said, "I completely understand Russian." Suddenly they became cheerful. The gentleman hugged me and shook my hand, and I was offered a drink and cigarettes. It was hilarious, especially to my friend who did not understand Russian. Story 22. A long time ago, my brother had a habit of making remarks about people in Spanish whenever he got annoyed, frustrated, or just wanted to make fun of someone, kind of like a gossiping schoolgirl. I told him it wasn't cool, not because he shouldn't speak Spanish in public, but because he shouldn't use it in such an underhanded way. If he had a grievance that he needed to get off his chest, he should tell them in English, a language they are likely to understand where we live. He kept doing it anyway. One time we were leaving a major retailer and the store greeter asked to see his receipt before he could exit with the bagged merchandise in the cart. He had a hard time finding his receipt and got frustrated. He switched to Spanish and said something like, "This old bitch," and the store greeter immediately called him out on it in Spanish. He was like a deer caught in the headlights. I was glad she did it. He made a weak attempt to reassert his right to be frustrated by the situation, but you could see he was very embarrassed at having been caught talking trash in Spanish. I love my brother, but I'm glad he stopped doing that soon after. Story 23. My wife is Indian and her family speaks Gujarati. I have spent many years trying to pick it up and have found it very difficult, as there are no good resources, as far as I know, for learning it. You have to listen and guess the context. Over the years I have gotten pretty good, and when my wife's aunt was visiting from India, she immediately started on my wife about how much weight I had gained and how bad my diet must be. I understood every word and stopped her about 2 minutes into her rant, but it did not stop her. She kept going. Story 24. I lived in Japan when I was little and retook Japanese in college, so I did not sound like a child when I spoke. To solidify my language skills, I went to my hometown for about 6 weeks each summer while in college. It was a small town, so most people remembered me or my family, but some of the families I stayed with were new to the area since we had left about 15 years earlier. I spent 6 weeks with 11 different families who at least wanted me to spend a night in their homes. One of these families had a high school-aged son who wanted to borrow me for his high school international festival. No problem. I would go and let other high school students practice their English with me and play carnival games. However, the young man apparently did not get the message that I spoke Japanese and proceeded to introduce me to all his friends as his girlfriend. I let him have his moment for the night without leading him on, but on the train ride back to his home, he was talking to his friend in Japanese and I joined the conversation. The embarrassment on his face was worth knowing that all his friends thought I was his girlfriend. Story 25. I wouldn't consider myself fluent in Spanish, but I speak and understand enough to tell when people are talking about me and the general topic. A messed up story happened a few weeks ago. I was servicing an automated teller machine in a rather sketchy neighborhood. While loading the machine, a school down the street must have just let out and a group of teenagers came in, all speaking Spanish about typical teenage things. A few of them noticed the $5,000 in $5 bills I had in my hand and loudly told a friend it was the most money they'd ever seen. I hear that reaction a lot, so I planned to ignore them, but then one of them said they would go home to get his dad's pistol, shoot me in the back of the head, steal the money, and use it to buy a bunch of weed and video games. Of course, they didn't think I understood them. As a white man in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, most people do not expect me to understand their language. I calmly locked everything up while they continued making plans to kill and rob me, finished with the machine, then turned to them with my hand on my gun and told them in Spanish to go home and not to talk about murdering and robbing someone right in front of that person. This is quite rude and could get them killed in the process. They were visibly terrified, and I walked out of the store laughing. Story 26. I am Greek but study in Belgium. Greeks are notorious for talking about people loudly when abroad. The language is rare enough that most people, including myself, usually feel comfortable doing that. The only problem with that logic is that there are so many of us around the world that it is generally not a good idea. One day I got on the tram and there was a woman in her 30s sitting across from me who said to her friend very loudly in Greek, "What is that supposed to be? A boy or a girl?" For non-Greeks, we have a third neutral grammatical gender that we use for objects, animals, or when speaking about someone in a very rude and derogatory way. She used that form in a mocking tone. I calmly validated my ticket and, as I was walking away, I replied in Greek, "It is a girl, and she speaks Greek as well." Her face was hilarious. She made a mortified sound and did not utter another word until she got off a few stops later. I love this story, but it kind of terrifies me. I avoid talking about other people, but I tend to have very personal conversations with my Greek friends in public places, confident that nobody understands, even after proving to myself that it is not very safe. Story 27. To be fair to everyone involved, the odds that I would understand them were small. When I was in an Arabic-speaking country for a language immersion program, one of the other people in the group and I ended up in a shop run by Chinese immigrants in that Middle Eastern country. Before I started studying Arabic, I had taken a few years of Chinese. In fact, my Arabic was worse than my Chinese. We could barely speak Arabic with them, but in Chinese we could understand that they just wanted us to buy their goods and leave. Story 28. My former in-laws speak Italian. I entered the marriage without knowing Italian, but I picked it up fairly well. My mother-in-law had a habit of speaking Italian with her family while I sat right there. Everyone spoke English, so she did not need to use Italian to be understood. I tolerated it, and it became interesting to hear what she said about me when I was present. I left the marriage mainly because of how her son treated me, though her behavior did not help. One day she called and complained that I was a terrible wife and mother. I said, "I actually understand Italian. I understood everything you said about me when you thought I did not know." She went quiet and ended the call. It was wonderful. Story 29. I do not know if this is cool, but I live in India and I do not really look like the people in my home state. People always assume I am from another state or another country and do not understand their language, Tamil, despite it being my mother tongue since I was born there. Here, the transport buses have a conductor from whom you buy a ticket. I was traveling in one such bus and the conductor approached me to buy a ticket. Seeing me, he assumed I did not know Tamil and tried his best to ask me to purchase a ticket in the little English he knew. He could have just said ticket and I would have taken it, but instead he tried to form a clumsy sentence in English. I smiled and told him that I would like to buy a ticket to my destination in regular Tamil with the appropriate slang. He smiled, handed me the ticket, and asked where I was from in Tamil this time. I told him I was from this state. He did a double take, then nodded happily and moved on to the next passenger. Felt pretty cool to me. Story 30. I was in New York and entered one of those electronic stores. I asked the price of an item in English. The man at the counter turned to another man who was on a ladder stocking items and asked in Hebrew how much he should charge. I speak Hebrew, so I followed their dialogue. The man on the ladder looked at me and noticed I was following them with my eyes. Then he switched to Arabic. I do not speak Arabic. The man at the counter told me the price in English. I said it was too expensive in Hebrew and left. No, it was not B&H. It was a generic electronics store that sells overpriced goods to foreign tourists who do not have time to shop around. Story 31. Some workers at an airport restaurant were saying very inappropriate things about my sister in Spanish. The women criticized her appearance while arguing with the men, who made obscene comments about what she was wearing and what they would do to her. I ordered in Spanish, and the workers went silent and looked stunned. I asked detailed questions about the menu in Spanish so they would understand I knew everything they had been saying. I gave my sister my credit card, but the cashier never swiped it, so a $40 airport meal was free. In the end, it was a win. Story 32. I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, and we were returning from a vacation in Agra. We were traveling by train, and a lovely family sat in front of us. I think they were British. My mother was asleep, and I was reading Champak, a children's story magazine in India that used to be very popular. In the 1990s, they were talking among themselves when one of the girls looked at me and said that I was so adorable. Instead of doing the proper thing, that is, saying thank you, I blushed hard and pretended to fall asleep. If by chance you are reading this, thank you. That memory still brings a smile to my face. Story 33. My husband grew up in multiple countries and, though his English is heavily accented, it is an unidentifiable hybrid of all the places where he learned it in school because he did not move to the United States until his late 20s. When we went for our wedding rings, my fair-skinned self and my Latino-looking then-fiancé walked into a tiny shop. The two proprietors began speaking in Hebrew, one of my husband's first languages, about how much to charge. The first suggested at least $650. The second said to tell him it will be at least $700 and then suggested $750 as a try. My husband smiled and replied in Hebrew that he would give them $500. They froze, everyone laughed, and we entered a more open negotiation. We paid $600 and I think everyone was happy. Story 34. I actually have the reverse story. I had to act as if I didn't speak a language. I was going back home after studying for a while in Uppsala, Sweden, and during that time I had the occasion to learn quite a lot of Swedish. Anyway, to get home I had to buy a train ticket to Arlanda Airport from Uppsala Central for a flight that was very early in the morning. I bought my ticket with the train company Statens Järnvägar. However, the first train that arrived at the station and was going to the Airport was an Uplands Localtrific train, a different company, and I had not bought a ticket for it. Worried that I would be late to the airport, I still took the train, thinking that they almost never check tickets and that my ticket might actually work for that company too. They did check that day. The ticket inspector asked me in Swedish to see my ticket. I handed it to him and he looked at me and said in Swedish, "Wrong ticket." So I decided to play the dumb tourist. I pointed to my passport and, in a bad French accent, said, "Sorry, I don't speak Swedish," and explained that I thought this ticket was the right one to go to the airport. He immediately gave the ticket back and said it was okay, but to check next time to buy the right ticket for the right company. He said this in English. I got off without any fine. I still feel bad about it today. If the inspector who met me that day is reading this, I just want to say, Takok Forlit. Story 35. I am Romanian and an architect. In Western Europe, many construction workers are from Romania. A few colleagues invited me to a party on a construction site in Germany. We have a celebration once the structure stands, the Richtfest, and they asked me to listen to the Romanian workers to find out how work went and whether they were complaining about the architects. I did not hear anything negative all night. As they were preparing to leave shortly after dinner, I borrowed a cigarette from one of them, speaking Romanian. They were thrilled. Finally, someone could translate between them and the other workers and planners. They were so proud of their work and so happy to be able to communicate with everyone, so we all, architects, clients, workers, and engineers, got very drunk, smoked many cigarettes, and had the best time I have ever had on a construction site. My colleagues reported that the work continued the next day with a lot of new motivation, and good times were had by all. I am also a woman, which adds an extra layer of positivity, because it can be really tough as a woman in the construction industry. Those workers made us all proud. Be excellent to each other and treat the people whose labor builds our world with respect. I am going to pay this platinum positivity forward. Story 36. I have found that if I want to defuse a situation with someone I believe is a native Spanish speaker, I switch languages and ask if they want to speak Spanish. 9 out of 10 times, people are less stressed. The other person is relieved that they can express themselves better in a more comfortable language, and I will still understand. Story 37. I am Irish and I am studying in Spain at the moment. The other day I was in a restaurant with my friend, and there was a group of 3 or 4 English men beside us. My friend and I were speaking French, so they must have assumed we were French or did not understand English. They started shouting about how sexy we were and saying that I had better breasts and she had a better butt. I believe they were deliberately using a lot of slang in the hope that, even if we did speak English, we would not recognize the slang. I do because I have an English housemate. My friend does not speak much English, so I told her what they were saying and then loudly spoke in English about how there are many English speakers in this city and people should watch what they say because they never know who can understand them. They went completely silent and turned beetroot red. Fucking idiots. It is beyond me why they would assume that nobody in this city can speak English. It is a university town with a high international population. Story 38. The other way around. Belgian in the United States during Halloween. Some guy comes trick-or-treating at the restaurant where we were sitting. A girl from our group, we were all 16 to 18, says in Dutch to us that he is cute. The guy's face turns from happy and flirty to angry. He turns to the girl and shouts, "I'm not gay, you fucking bitch." Yeah, that's right. I understand German, and he's not cute anymore. Edit. To clarify, she said, snelm, which is actually fast in Dutch, but used in West Flemish to mean handsome. I think the guy understood schwul, which is an insulting word for gay in German. Story 39. This is a well-known experience for every English speaker living in Germany. Me, fluently speaking German. Them, hey, where do you come from, by the way? Me, oh, just the United States. They immediately switch to English. Why? At this point, I should just tell them I am from France. Story 40. My family is Italian. I do not speak the language, but I have a good understanding from listening to my father and my grandmother over the years. We went to Italy to visit family. My great-aunt said she was very happy to meet us and asked her son if we could understand her. When I said yes, she smiled broadly and hugged me. It was very sweet. Story 41. I am a Polish-speaking Mongolian currently residing in London. Once I was in Kew Gardens enjoying a cup of tea next to a lovely Polish couple who were clearly tourists planning their route through the garden. After a while, I noticed the man had left his hoodie behind, so I tracked them down to one of the places they had been discussing and casually handed him his hoodie, saying, "I think this is yours," in fluent Polish. He was utterly flummoxed and stood there with his mouth wide open for a minute or two. He didn't even thank me. I love their expressions when that happens. Story 42. My dad is extremely pale, like British royal family levels of whiteness. He was an exchange student in Bogota and is fluent in Spanish. My dad, my sister, my aunt, my uncle, and I were at the Mexican restaurant near our house. Everything was fine until we got the bill. Dad got a look on his face, stomped over to the cash register, and had a quiet but intense conversation in Spanish with the cashier. I am not sure of the details, but there had been some extra gringo taxes added to our bill, and we ended up with a significant discount after he called them on it. It was still one of our favorite places to eat. I was sad to see it close a couple of years ago. Story 43. At my old job, two Mexican men came in with a fuel injector but did not know what it was called in English or Spanish. I asked what car it was for, and they looked at each other and spoke in Spanish, saying, "This young man does not know anything about cars. Ask him if he can speak to a manager." I promptly replied in Spanish, "I am the manager, and I was asking what car it is for." Back in English I said, "That's called a fuel injector, sir." They were surprised and tried to be friendly with me, and I gave them a smug smile. Story 44. I am an African-American English speaker. I married a Chinese woman who speaks Cantonese and Mandarin. We took a trip to Japan on our honeymoon. I speak fluent Japanese. She does not. We went to a restaurant in Roppongi. The waitress approached us and recited the evening specials, the menu, and the drinks, speaking directly to my wife. I suppose she assumed that because my wife was Asian and I was not, my wife spoke Japanese. My wife was very confused. When the waitress finished with, "What can I start you with today?" my wife had no response. The waitress looked confused and ashamed, as if she had done something wrong. It was only when I said, "My wife is Chinese, but I would like to know what is on your wine menu tonight, please," that everyone had a good laugh, although they still looked confused and cautious. Story 45. I speak both German and Norwegian. While I lived in Berlin, I was once waiting for the city train when a group of young Swedish tourists stood next to me and discussed their impressions of Berlin. Because Norwegian and Swedish are fairly similar, I understood the whole conversation. They mainly talked about Nazi topics and how Berlin was a better place during Hitler's time. It was quite annoying to listen to, so out of the blue I asked them in Norwegian if they had already been to Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp closest to Berlin. They said they had not been yet and laughed. Story 46. I will try to simplify this for non-poker players, but just know that 8s beat 7s. I was in Detroit playing cards for slightly higher stakes than I am used to, and an obnoxious group of Lebanese men came to throw their money around. They were not good. They just bet big and bluffed a lot. I took a stand with pocket 8s and saw a flop of 4, 10, and Jack, all of different suits. I called a big pre-flop raise of $50 in a 4-way pot, and one player shoved all in for $450 more. Everyone folded around to me, and I thought for a bit. His friend asked what he had, which is against the rules in Arabic, and he answered Saba Saba, which means 7s. I looked up and said call and told him Shukran, which means thank you in Arabic. I am Asian, so it was obviously unexpected. The table erupted in laughter, and he was a good sport about it. He got roasted by his friends for the rest of the night, and most of the people there ended up losing their money anyway. Note: I still used poker jargon in the middle because poker players always want context. No, the 7 did not come. There was no flush and no straight. I learned Arabic living in Detroit and working in Dearborn Heights, which has the highest population density of Middle Eastern people outside the Middle East. I could have continued to take advantage of knowing the language, but they were acting crazy and irritating the dealers already, so it felt like sweet justice. Story 47. I am a Canadian Aboriginal. When I was 18, I spent a year in Germany. From age 3, I had been raised by a German immigrant family and picked up the language and culture early. During my time in Germany, I got a job working at McDonald's. I started on the fryer, worked up to the grill, and then someone realized that, as a Canadian, I am fluent in English. They put me on the front till because many American customers frequent McDonald's when overseas. American customers would come to my till and, in a loud, exaggerated, slow voice with big hand movements, lean toward me and say, "I would like a Big Mac and large fries." I would punch their order into the till and respond, "Okay, are you eating it here? Or will you be taking it with you?" At least a dozen jaws dropped per shift from astonished American customers. To answer how I knew they were American. Once I spoke English, the follow-up question was always, "What state are you from?" Story 48. Two deaf people were in my store signing and saying negative things about me. My sister is deaf, and I know American Sign Language. After I received their payment, I told them to get the fuck out and ended the conversation with the one sign everyone knows. Story 49. I'm a French-American living in Orlando. One time I was in line at Disney with my friends placing orders, but they kept saying they were out of what we wanted in perfect English. We ended up looking at the menu for a bit and placing another order. A Parisian man behind us said in French, "I don't think these dumbasses could take any longer if they wanted to." I abruptly turned around and, in perfect French, told him it was unfortunate we had all been prepared but they had run out of what we wanted, so we had to take a while to find something different to eat, and that he shouldn't talk like that in front of his daughter, who looked about 8 to 10. He just looked shocked and we left. While we were eating, he sent his daughter over to tell us he was sorry and that he hadn't realized they were out of what we wanted. It wasn't her fault, so we were fine with her, but what kind of person sends his daughter to apologize for him to a group of teens? We laughed. Story 50. My best friend is Vietnamese but apparently looks Chinese, and most nail salons are run by Vietnamese. Whenever we go, she texts me what they are saying if it is something funny or interesting. We went to one for a manicure and pedicure. We had never been before. We looked through the menu, told the woman what kind of pedicure we wanted, including the scent and the specials, and ordered a glass of wine each. The manager walked by a while later and spoke in Vietnamese to the women who were finishing our pedicures. My friend started texting me that he was freaking out because we had been served alcohol and no one had checked our identifications. He said there was no way we could be of legal age and that he could be fined. He called us baby-faced and said we looked like high school students. I was celebrating my 27th birthday with my 26-year-old friend. The conversation went on awkwardly as they tried to figure out what to do. Finally, just before I went back for my manicure, my nail technician asked for my identification and looked relieved. Whoops. Story 51. I'm an American with long blonde hair, so almost no one expects me to speak Spanish. I often catch people talking about me, but it's usually not exciting. One time I was getting a pretzel with a friend and the two women rolling pretzels started talking about us as soon as we walked up. They assumed we couldn't understand them, and we were close enough to hear every word. The conversation went something like, "Hey, check out this guy who just walked up. He's so handsome." "The tall one with the beard?" my friend asked. "No, the big one. I love his hair." I ordered my pretzel and tried not to laugh as we walked away. I didn't know whether to make it obvious that I understood, so I kept it to myself. I enjoyed the confidence boost and left out the ew, gross part when I told my friend afterward. Story 52. This was my mom, not me. She was the manager of a Gap clothing store. A girl was on the phone speaking another language, saying she was about to run out with her 2 bags filled with merchandise she had hidden and asking to be picked up promptly at the exit. My mom turned and said in that language, "You had better just run. I have you on camera." The girl ran. The 1990s were much cooler to work in retail. Story 53. I was in an elevator in India with 2 women when a man from Africa entered. The 2 women began making fun of his skin color and his country in Hindi and exited on the next floor. A moment later, the man spoke to me in Hindi. He said he had been living in India for 5 years and that he was a diplomat. He added that people say such things in many of the places he visits. Story 54. When I was in Romania as a Hungarian, I went to buy some food in a small town. I did not know the people in the restaurant were ethnic Hungarians, so when I asked for my food in English, the man shouted a burger for this fucker in Hungarian to the kitchen. I was curious how it would end, so I pretended I did not understand. When he brought my food and asked for double the price, I said in Hungarian, "Look, dude, you can give me that for the normal price or I am leaving it. But I will sure as hell not come back to you motherfuckers ever again." Story 55. I was a Mexican living in Germany with a Chinese school-assigned roommate. He claimed not to speak any English, and my German was not good, so we could not communicate. My German roommate said he also told them he did not speak German, so I assumed he was antisocial. I had taken 3 years of Mandarin in high school, but I did not try speaking it to him at first. About 3 months in, he and another Chinese student got off the bus at the same stop as me, and we walked together to our flat. I heard him talking about me and his friend laughing, but I held back. When we arrived at the flat, I opened the door and asked them to come in Chinese. I still remember his shocked face. His friend later complimented my Chinese, while a few weeks later my roommate said my Chinese was so bad that he could not understand me. I think he simply wanted no contact with me, possibly because he never followed the cleaning schedule. Story 56. I posted this before, long ago. I am Flemish and work as a safari guide in the Kruger area of South Africa. One time my boss asked me to pick up a family of 4 at the Clasery Reserve Gate, do an afternoon game drive with them, and drop them off afterwards. That was very uncommon, because normally we only take guests who have booked a room at our lodge on the reserve. I picked them up, introduced myself, and went over the rules all in English. They replied in English, or at least the father did. Normally, I can tell right away if someone is from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, or Germany by their accent. His English was perfect Oxford English, so I assumed they were English and we set off. About 10 minutes into the drive, I heard them speaking Flemish, and not only that, in my own dialect. Every Flemish town has a dialect. You can often tell the region or even the exact town someone is from. I thought I was going to have fun with them. I found a few good animal sightings and spoke English the whole time, but then, from one sentence to the next, they switched to their exact dialect. I expected them to be surprised, but they were not. We all ended up chatting in Flemish. Only about 20 minutes later the daughter, around 10 years old, said, "Wait a minute, he speaks Flemish." After we all had a good laugh, I asked where they were from. They lived one street away from me. It is a small world. Story 57. I was born to Russian immigrants. When my family and I travel abroad, we almost exclusively speak Russian and generally receive better treatment when people do not think we are American tourists. When I was about 12, we were in a cafe in Belgium when a large group of 20-something men walked in. My father got a worried look, lowered his voice, and said that we were Americans at that moment. He later explained that the men were Chechen gang members during the war in Chechnya when anti-Russian sentiment was extremely high. Story 58. I took 5 years of French in school and later traveled to France. At a restaurant, a woman spoke about me in French after she heard me attempting to order by sounding out items on the menu. I am not good at understanding French, but I could make out phrases like "stupid American." I do not think she had a favorable view of Americans. Story 59. I am half French and half Irish. I lived in France most of my life and went to the fan zone for the game France versus Ireland at the 2016 European Championship. I was wearing my Irish scarf and I also look Irish. France won, and at the end of the game a French fan taunted me with poor English, saying something like, "Haha, loser." I replied in French, "HM, I am French, dude." The look of stupidity and confusion on his face was priceless. Story 60. I am a native English speaker studying Japanese. Before I moved to Japan, I worked at my hometown's international supermarket. The Japanese customers I noticed were usually very nice. One time a younger woman brought in her child, and the child said she was hungry and wanted ramen candy. I did not want them to feel like I was eavesdropping, so after I rang them up I motioned to some ramen candies we had on sale that day, which I had placed on my register. I tried to make it seem nonchalant, and the woman decided to chip in and buy some. The child was happy and I was happy too. Edit. Thanks for the awards. I am glad many people enjoyed this memory. Story 61. I was in line at Disneyland in California. A group of Japanese teenage tourists was ahead of me. I speak Japanese, so I could understand that they were making fun of Americans. They were mostly saying things like, "On television they seem so cool, but all of these Americans are so fat and ugly." They were laughing and sometimes pointing at people. I stayed quiet, but then one of the cast members, who also spoke Japanese, walked up to them and told them in perfect Japanese, "You should be careful. Most Americans can speak Japanese." They all froze and looked around at people, many of whom were giving them dirty looks. I nodded as if to back him up, and they were horrified. They left the line promptly afterward. Story 62. I live in Australia, but my ethnicity is Chin, a small ethnic group from Burma, so I can speak and understand Burmese, although I don't look like a typical Burmese person. This happened a few years ago when I was working as a cashier after school. A couple came to my checkout, and the wife started making snide comments in Burmese about how I was packing their groceries incorrectly. The husband smiled and gently asked me to fix certain bags, which I did without problems, but she kept complaining about every little thing. After about the fourth comment, I asked her in Burmese to please tell me how she would like her groceries packed. They both froze, and the husband turned to the wife and said, "See, this is why you don't talk about someone in our language." Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.